Hello and welcome to the Common Archetypes, where we discover our power by discovering ourselves. My name is Paola, and if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you hit the like button, the subscribe button, as well as the bell notification. And if you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any other podcasting platform, then please feel free to hit the follow button and give me a 5-star review, 5-star only. So we'll begin with our archetype of the day, and it is the sage. And I actually have notes, which is in line with this archetype. The sage falls under the umbrella of knowledge and information. These are very smart, very knowledgeable, very intellectual, and very logical people. They delve into research. They are the researchers of society. They find out the why, how, when, where, and all those other questions we have basically about the world. They're very knowledge based and very information driven. They love gathering information. They like solving puzzles. That is their domain. They love gathering information, finding out why this particular thing or this particular event happened to work out this way, and they aren't afraid to delve into that realm of information. They are the masters of the mental space. This is a very mind-driven archetype, and they are constantly in their mind, which can sometimes make them disassociate from the physical or the spiritual world. They're very logical, and sometimes they can be a little bit elitist. Okay, most sage like to pursue higher education, and by higher education, I'm talking above undergrad. Undergrad to a degree, yes, but in most societies nowadays, most undergrad degrees are a given. Someone who embodies the sage will have like 5 degrees. They're not just satisfied with one. They have literally information is their domain. So collecting degrees, if you know someone who collects degrees of this is you probably have the sage active. And again, when I mean active, I mean it is in your top 3. They tend to be in specialized fields, especially fields that require a lot of information, a lot of puzzle solving, a lot of critical thinking, all these kind of stuff. That is the sage. They have a thirst for knowledge, they have a thirst for mastery, and they are second in command to people who tend to have the queen and king archetypes. If you want to think in terms of olden days, this is the advisor to the king or the advisor to the queen. They inform them about what is going on in the country or the realm. They tell them who their allies are, who their enemies are. They set up a plan to make sure the king and the queen is successful. That is why they're also second in command to the king and the queen. And most of the time, not all the time, because this archetype tends to have a mature and immature side. Most of the time, a mature sage goal is to know the truth. And I actually think this is the actual goal of people who do embody this archetype, this archetype of knowledge and finding and discovering stuff and researching. It is because they want to know the truth. They're very truth driven and they want to know how things work. That is how their minds work. However, in its immature state, a sage's goal would be to gain power. Because like I said again, they are second in command to the king and queen. And this archetype is very knowledge-based. It's very logical. Most sages have been told they are the smartest from the day they were born. They're very smart. They're the definition of smart, all right? And because of that, they navigate the world with their mind, with their logic. However, if you resonate with this archetype, or if you've ever come across this archetype, you will know people don't really care about what you have to say. Okay? If you want to have fulfilling relationships with people in the world, yes, what you say is important, but how you make that person feel is even more important than what you are saying. Sage, like I said, they're very logical, very factual, very analytical. Sometimes they can be a bit robotic because there's so much in their mind, and some of them can be detached from the emotional state to the point where they don't understand how they come across. They can come across as very robotic at times because they're logic-based and factual-based. And again, the king and the queen, they are the ones who are in charge, and they tend to lead the physical realm because they understand knowledge is power. However, how a person feels in your presence is more important than what you're actually saying. And for some sage, they just cannot wrap their minds around that, which we're going to touch into the immature state of the sage. But yes, if you want to know if the sage archetype is active in you, simple. You read a lot of self-help books. Do you focus so much on knowledge and factual stuff when you talk to people? It's not a bad thing, okay? This is just to identify. If throughout this series you've already watched 3 or more videos, the sage is probably active in you. Or if this is your first video and you plan on watching other videos, the sage is active in you. Again, information gathering, okay? Knowledge and information gathering is what the sage excels at. And they love gathering information. They love being in the know. These are the people who will know all the current events, even the events that are not happening in their immediate city. They know what is happening across the globe because gathering information and knowledge is their domain. These people thrive in these fields. These people thrive when they're doing this. And another part of this archetype is also networking. They're really good networkers and they're really good communicators. And if you go back to the innocent and the charmer, where I talked about how a good communicator is also a great manipulator, this also applies to this archetype because they're so information driven and they love to communicate what they have learned, which is great. They can also turn into a little bit of gaslighters. In that sense, the people who do embody this archetype will fall more into the immature state of the sage, which is the gatekeepers. They will gatekeep information or maybe just share some information with you, but not all the information, or omit stuff. So they can really gaslight a lot of people. And because they're so logical, they are known as the logical one, the smart one, the go-to person to know about this random facts. People are just going to believe them because of the nature of this archetype. So they can really gatekeep a lot of information and basically gaslight a lot of people. And in gaslighting other people, they're also gaslighting themselves. So because sage are also good at finding information and at knowledge, they're also really good at finding the loophole into stuff. And since we're talking about loopholes, let's just dive into the careers where you would see a lot of people who embody this archetype. So the careers that embody this archetype, these are your lawyers. These are the people in the tech field. These are your news anchors, your journalists, your reporters, your engineers, your scientists, because the aspect of the sage is also researching and finding out the how, the what, and the why of why a certain thing works. These are your pharmacists, your politicians, because sage, they love to communicate and they also enjoy a good debate. It works for them, all right? They love debating, they like finding knowledge, they like learning new ideas, and they also love debating, mostly amongst other sage, all right? So your politicians will also fall into this. Your economists, your university professors who are sharing their knowledge and sharing what they've learned. This is the sage. And lastly, your doctors, parentheses, question mark. I'm going to go into some aspect of this archetype that can be a bit iffy, but I do want you, the listener, or if you resonate with this archetype, to just extend a lot of grace and a lot of patience and empathy, all right? Because finding this out was shocking to me. But whenever I try to explain these archetypes, I try to be as non-biased and as non-judgmental as possible. However, discovering this fact, I had to sit back and really extend grace and empathy. Just like I have extended grace and empathy to any of the other archetypes, I feel like this one should be extended grace and empathy because it is just the nature of how this archetype works, and I don't think it is ill intention. All right, so this is actually a warning, a trigger warning. If you're not in a good headspace to learn facts about how some stuff works when it relates to the healthcare field, please click off until you come back. Okay, but we're going to dive in. All right. If you were here last week or a couple of weeks ago, I talked about how the archetype of the mystic and the hermit, and again, the mystic is the feminine component and the hermit is the masculine component of this archetype of acceptance and detachment. I told you how they are the medicine man and the medicine woman. They're the wounded healers. And I told you careers where you would see most mystic and most hermits would be the healthcare field because, again, they're natural healers. All right. But in the case of the sage, it's important to know that the sage is not a healer. The sage is a knowledge based archetype. They gather a lot of information. Their knowledge and information, and most of their goal is to find the truth. They're not natural healers. However, they will gather a lot of information to be able to, I guess, practice. Is just how I'm going to stop it right there. And I find that when it comes to doctors, especially doctors, because again, this archetype is a very intellectual and they can be a tad bit elitist. They like to push themselves to the highest limit when it comes to their mind. So this will mostly fall under the career field of doctors, not nurses, doctors. And this is not me saying doctors are above nurses in any way, but people who do embody the sage archetype to a degree believe one is more prestigious than the other. Let's just say that. And I'm not going to hold anything back, okay? Like I said, this is a trigger warning. If you don't like it, please exit. They might subconsciously believe that, maybe not even consciously. They might have an unconscious bias that one is more prestigious than the other because in our society, we do see some careers as more elevated than the others. And like I prefaced before, the goal of the immature sage is to gain power. And in gaining knowledge, they will also gain certain powers. But when it comes to healthcare, it's a little bit different. A lot of sage, not usually because I gave you a plethora of other careers, but there's also a good number of sage who will find themselves in the healthcare field because they are knowledge driven and not because they're actual healers. And this has nothing to do with this archetype. Again, this archetype, they're great. Okay. Information and knowledge and gathering knowledge and finding out why things work is how we have progressed scientifically, is how I'm able to record right now. When it comes to technological advancement, the sage archetype has always led because they are information driven. So this archetype is really helpful. However, when it comes to healthcare, this archetype can easily step into the healthcare field because the way healthcare is taught right now, it's very information based. And that in it of itself is not a bad thing. You should have a lot of information about a plethora of diseases that are happening. You expect your doctors and your healthcare practitioners to have a lot of different information about all the illnesses and all the diseases so they can make an accurate diagnosis. However, knowledge is not healing. Knowledge and healing, although similar, there are also a lot of differences. And honestly, I don't even think society knows about it. So I'm not blaming this archetype by any means. I do want to extend a lot of grace and a lot of empathy, right? Because this is a very knowledgeable archetype. And I don't want to demonize anyone who does have this archetype and they find themselves gravitating toward the healthcare field, even though they are not healers. The difference between a sage who practices health and a mystic and a hermit who are healers by nature represent itself in a scenario that a lot of us have actually encountered, which is why I had to preface all that just to give you how it will practice. Most ways that healing is taught here, they're very knowledge based. You have to know all these stuff, which is great. However, when it comes to illnesses, when it comes to disease, it's not just about what you know. It's not just about how certain symptoms present itself on a patient. There are a lot of other stuff that are taken in consideration. And yes, healthcare is taking those stuff into consideration. However, there's some stuff that is still lacking because our society is tying knowledge together with healing. And that's just not true. So I'm going to give you an example of a knowledgeable doctor and an actual healer who is a doctor, because Doctors are supposed to be healers, but in our society, we have a lot of knowledgeable doctors who are not actually healing, which is unfortunate. But again, it's not the doctor's fault. It's because of what is taught in school and what is prioritized in those schools where they do learn how to become doctors. So let's just dive in. This is just an example. And if this has happened to you or your family or any loved one, I apologize. It's just the way our society works. I really don't think ill intention is given here, but it's something I've heard and seen in my own eyes time and time again. So a lot of us, myself included, there are times when I have visited the doctor because, I'm sick, I have some stuff, and I need healing, right? You would think you should go to the doctor to get this healing. And this is just an example. You go to the doctor looks at your symptoms. And this is just for easy math, This is a very analytical, mathematical archetype, so we're just going to do easy math here. A lot of stuff does come along with healthcare, and it's not always robotic, but there are also a lot of knowledgeable people in the healthcare industry that just can be a bit robotic. So I'm just going to break it down like this. So let's say you go to the doctor. You have 10 different symptoms, okay? And the doctor looks at your chart, they review your symptoms, and they identify that based on these 9 symptoms, there's a probability that you have XYZ illness. Again, very logical. It makes sense. And if you go to a knowledgeable doctor, they'll be like, yes, because none of your symptoms are presenting this way, you have this illness. All right? They will give you a prescription. You take that medicine, you go home, and instead of feeling better, you feel worse. You go back to the doctor again. You say, hey, this is still happening to me. Or maybe another symptom presented itself. They look at your chart again. They're like, yeah, you definitely have this. You get frustrated. You go to get a second opinion. And you go to another doctor. And then this doctor, who's the healing doctor, will look at your symptoms. Yes, based on you have 10 different symptoms. And based on these 9 symptoms, you will have this. I agree with the diagnosis of your first doctor. However, this particular symptom right here, it's not really aligned with this. And they might give you some time and say, let me just check this out and see what happens. And then they give you a call. They say, I actually think you have XYZ diagnosis. You're confused. You're like, how can I get 2 different diagnoses from 2 people who are doctors, who have the degree, who have the credential, but from Dr. A, which is the knowledgeable doctor, I got this diagnosis, I got diagnosis A, and from Dr. B, I got diagnosis B. So you decide to listen to Dr. B. Just why not? It's not going to hurt, right? You go along with the medication that Dr. B gives you, and boom, your symptoms get better. And then you wonder, how could this be? That is because Dr. A is a knowledgeable doctor. Dr. A is a sage. Logically, it does not make sense. In this easy example, I understand how simplified I try to make it be. And healthcare is much more complex, okay? Because the last thing I want to make it seem is that the sage is stupid. They're not stupid. They're very smart, very analytical, and very logical. But there are times where they do have a blind spot. And that blind spot tends to show itself a lot of the time when it comes in healthcare. And that is simply because they are not healers. They are knowledge-based. They're information gatherers. They are scientists. But a scientist is not necessarily a healer. And in that scenario, in that little picture I painted, that I have gone through, and I'm sure if you're listening to this, you may have gone through this or not. Hopefully it's nothing bad, which is why I had to give that trigger warning, because health is wealth. I believe health is wealth. There are also a lot of doctors who are very knowledge-based, but they're not healers at their core. And it's because of this archetype. Again, I'm not trying to shame them. I'm just trying to provide an explanation as to why you would get 2 different diagnoses from 2 different people you would think are the same, but because of their archetypal nature, you do not get the same result. All right. So in this example, like I said, going back to the example, Dr. A will be the knowledgeable doctor. Dr. A is the one who has analyzed the symptoms, and based on Diggy's symptoms, just like a mathematical equation, none of your symptoms fell under one certain category. So they dismissed that last symptom as an outlier. Okay, because outliers do happen in the healthcare field. Sometimes you have this weird thing, your doctor might not know what it is. They dismissed it and they focus on the nine. Most people who are not healers will focus on the nine. But Dr. B, in this instant, because they're a healer, yes, they saw that nine of your symptoms presented a certain way. But going back to the mystic and hermit archetype, I also said they're clear cognizant. That 10th symptom, that last symptom that presented differently than the other nine, it's gonna bring up an alarm in a healer, in a clear cognizant person. They're gonna pick up on that subtle cue because of the nature of that archetype. Like I said, very observational and very focused. It doesn't mean they're not knowledge based, but that simple thing that Dr. A dismissed as an outlier, the healer, the clear cognizant, the mystic, and the hermit, they will pick up on that, which is what makes them true healers. Healthcare and healing is knowledge based. It is. However, that is not the core of what it is. Yes, you need the knowledge. Yes, you need the good bedside manners to be able to make your patient and know that you have their best intention at heart. However, there's also a third component. And I think this is actually why our healthcare field is so messed up, because we focus so much on the knowledge aspect, which is a good aspect, but we're missing the other subtle cues. And I don't know what those cues are. If I knew, I would have told you. All right. I myself do not know what they are. As I was making this series and as I was trying to decipher all these archetypes, this was just something that was revealed to me. And I was just like, oh my gosh, it makes so much sense. I do want to preface this. I'm not telling you to not get medication or to not listen to your knowledgeable doctor. It's not their fault. It is the way the school is set up. It is the way our society is set up for knowledge to be pushed up at the forefront when it comes to health. Like I said, knowledge does have an aspect in health, but it's not the core. That is not where it stems. So I'm not saying if you happen to come across a knowledgeable doctor or a doctor who says you have a certain diagnosis, you take the medication and you actually feel worse than before, don't take it. I'm not saying that. Listen, it's better to have a knowledgeable doctor than no doctor at all. All right. And in this case, where our society is flooded with a lot of knowledgeable doctors who are going about healthcare, just focusing on the knowledge aspect and not the other aspect, because it is kind of elusive. Mystic and hermit, they're the masters of the spiritual, and spiritual stuff can get really woo at times. I get that. And the sage is very mental, grounded, rooted, and logical. They don't do woo. Understandable. If for some reason you cannot, get a second opinion or a third opinion and come across a doctor who happens to be a healer, my other advice would be to pray on your medication. I know it sounds crazy, but if you go back to, again, the video of the mystic and the hermit, then you will know that I said they are also the archetype that show up in religious people. They are the medicine man, the medicine woman, they're the healers of communities, and they also show up in a lot of religious people. However, they are the true healers. But if you find yourself in a situation where you cannot go to a doctor who does embody the true healing capabilities, but you happen to find yourself with a sage doctor, as crazy as it sounds, my advice would be to pray over your medication. It's crazy, but you never know. It wouldn't hurt, all right? It will not hurt. Pray over your medication. Pray over your food so that all the healing components can help you and all the bad stuff will not hinder you, stuff like that. If you don't believe in God, maybe Ask for your spirits to guide you into you finding a true healing doctor and not a knowledgeable doctor. Yes, that is the end of my rant. When I did come across this, I was very upset because I do know a lot of people who have gone to the doctor because they were hurt, they needed healing, and instead of getting healing, they became worse. All hope is not lost, okay? There are a lot of healing doctors out there. However, it will take some time to be able to seek them out, but all hope is not lost, all right? And when it comes to healing, actual healing, or getting your body back into homeostasis, are you going to feel nauseous or be fatigued? Yes, you will, but at the end of the day, healing is supposed to heal you. Healing is not meant for you to get another illness or get another disease. You should not go to the doctor for an illness. You take medication for that illness, or your illness gets worse, or in another case, you take medication for your illness goes away, but you develop something else. That is not healing. That's experimentation. And experimentation is the domain of the sage. That is not the domain of a healer. But all hope is not lost. Like I said, it sounds crazy. It sounds unhinged. I understand how woo this is getting, but honestly, praying over your medication or asking God or anyone you worship to guide you when it comes to healing, because the archetype of the healers is also the same archetype of religious people. Pray over your medication, pray over your food. There are some dietary components that play into healing, but doing those hopefully will help you, or pray to actually come across a true healer. But all hope is not lost. And if you have been hurt because of the medical field, or because you have come across a knowledgeable doctor, again, it's not their fault. It's just the way things are set up in our society, and we think knowledge is healing when it's not. There's another component, and that component is actually the core of what healing is. But, that's just how the world is now. All right. So getting out of this really, really damper energy, I'm going to go across the movies and TV shows and series where you will find this archetype at play. And if you peep the fact that I didn't put any doctor show, any doctor movie when I was talking about the mystic and the hermit, although they are healers, that is because most doctor shows and most doctor movies actually show the knowledgeable doctor, which is the sage. And like I said, they're not healers. They just know a lot. Think human medical encyclopedia. That's all they are. So this is where your good doctor will fall in. This is where your Grey's Anatomy will fall in. Very knowledge based. The rarest of the rarest diseases. There are some other components in those shows, but they really do show you the knowledge base of the doctor. But again, healing is something else. And before I go into the other shows that depict the sage in a more, favorable light, if you want to know if you're coming across a knowledgeable doctor or if you're coming across a true healing doctor, it's very simple. All right. Do you feel judged? Because a part of this archetype, like I said, they can be a tad bit elitist and they are judgmental. And if you go back to the mystic and the hermit, I'm just going to keep referring to that video because they're the true healers. But in our society, you will find a lot of sage, knowledgeable doctors. All right. But if you go back to that archetype, you will know they fall under the umbrella of acceptance and detachment. And they are the outcast. They know what it's like for you to be hurt. They know what it's like for you to be wounded. And the detachment aspect mostly comes from physical stuff. It's not like they're detached from people. They might detach from society, but they will not detach from people. All right. They fall under acceptance and detachment. And most of the time, people just come to them and they are their raw, vulnerable self. So if you feel judged by your doctor, the likelihood of you being across a knowledgeable doctor is really high. And I would just tell you, if you can hightail out of there, because at the end of the day, they're not even healers. All right. So just asterisk. But if you can't, like I said, pray over your medication, and pray over your food. As crazy as that thought is. So now, moving out of the healthcare field, because this is not actually the field for the sage, we're going to go into the fields they really excel at. Like I said, your lawyers, right? Scandal, good representation of the sage at work, fantastic. House of Cards, your politician, good representation of the sage at work. I know the actor who was playing there got canceled because, he was being a creep, but honestly, that those two series are excellent representation of the sage at work. How to Get Away with Murder is also a really good representation at work. I guess in all of these series, just look at the knowledge and the analyzing. Okay, take out all the extra intimacy stuff, because most people who do actually embody the sage, they tend to be so stuck in their mind where they don't really connect with people. Like, I don't want to say they don't connect with people physically, but they tend to be stuck in their minds a lot. So they're very analytical and very logical. So in those shows, just take the analysis and the logical aspect, or even the little scheming aspect. That's very sage-like. Okay, they will scheme and they will gaslight. Remember, I told you that. And another example from the East would be Extraordinary Attorney Wu, where she's very factual, very logic-based, legally blonde as well. And you can really see the lady who was, she was selling a bunch of bogus stuff to her clients, and she went out. If you watch Legally Blonde, you will know. And Elle was like, no, she's not going to tell them what she did, even though what she did was wrong. She was getting lipo, but she's selling exercise stuff as if she just got her body naturally. Like I said, the sage will find a loophole. She will find a way to make sure that the king and queen archetype are good, and they're very logical, and they will find loopholes. They will find a way, and they're very knowledge based. So Legally Blonde is actually a really, really good example. But Elwood is also a combination of the innocent and the sage. And I guess an example from the East, I don't know why I've been giving a lot of anime recommendation lately. An example from the East would be Dr. Stone. And to a degree, Apothecary Diaries. And the main character in Apothecary Diaries is actually a combination of both sage and mystical hermit. So she is a healer, even though it's a very knowledge-based archetype. So you can have the sage archetype and also have the mystic and the hermit archetype. You can't have both of those. Like I said, is it in your top 3? If you have mystic or hermit in your top 3, you're a healer. It doesn't matter if it's your first, secondary, or third, you're a healer. But if you just have sage, you're not a healer. You're very knowledge-based, and that's okay. All right, so the love language for most people who do embody the sage is words of affirmation. Like I said, they're very knowledge-based, they're very knowledge-driven, and they do like to show love, with their knowledge or affirming stuff to you. Sometimes they can also do acts of service, but it depends, right? But yes, so I really hope I didn't trigger a lot of people with this archetype. I do like this archetype, but when I did find out the association it has with the healthcare field, it did make me mad a little bit. But I'm also aware it's not the fault of the people who have this archetype, because this archetype is really cherished and it is really loved. But, they're just not healers. And the way we teach health is very knowledge-based, and it makes stuff muddy. It just makes stuff muddy. All right. I did not go into detail about the immature sage. Oh my gosh. And I have notes. This is why I don't have notes. I guess because I went on that long tangent about healthcare. I thought I talked about the cons of this archetype. I didn't. So we're just going to go into the cons. All right. The con of this archetype, again, they're egotistical. They're very knowledge-based. They're very analytical, and they're very logical. That unchecked will make someone who embodies the sage think they are above everyone else. They have superiority complex to the max. I mean, people who have king and queen archetype also have a superiority complex, but I tend to find that the sage are just on a different level. Very egotistical. Instead of using their knowledge to share the truth with the world, they will use their knowledge to gatekeep the truth. They will use their knowledge to make people around them feel lesser than, feel inadequate, like they're not smart enough, even though it's just them omitting some stuff in the story they're telling, or they are making it seem like something was a certain way and it's not. And because these people are very, very smart and very logical, most people don't question them when it comes to their authority, because they're also the experts in society. Like I said, they will have like 5 degrees. If someone comes in front of you with 5 degrees and they tell you, this is what I learned, this is the way, most people are not going to question that. They're going to look at that person's credential and see like, well, she has 5 degrees or he has 5 degrees. What do you have? Even though it's them gaslighting you. Like I said, part of this archetype can really be gaslighting. But the thing is, when a sage is immature, and this state, I guess the cons of a sage, when they gatekeep information, when they gaslight other people, when they omit some stuff in the story, they're really hindering themselves. This is a very knowledgeable archetype, and it's a very information-driven archetype. There's something that happens when you share what you know with someone else. There's something that happens when you bring your best foot into the world and you share what you have known. Other people will also share what they know. It's reciprocal. But immature sages, or sage who think they're the ish, would not share that information. They would not share what they know. And in turn, they will also hinder the capability of this archetype. This archetype is a very good archetype to have. And it is because of this archetype that we have had so much technological advancement. But that came with sharing, with collaborating. Think scientific theory, right? If you've ever read a scientific article, or if you want to prove a theory, I don't know, is it prove a theory? I'm not sure. There are a couple of steps that you have to go through. One of those steps is someone else being able to replicate your experiment and come to the same conclusion as you. A sage who does an experiment finds out something great, because I said these are people who find out the why, what, how. A sage who does that and keeps that information to themselves, yes, they're hindering the community, but they're also hindering themselves, because it's in that sharing and in that collaborative moment where another sage, or maybe someone who embodies another archetype, will be able to find something new and make new discoveries. This archetype is very network based and is very collaborative. But some people who embody this archetype just feel like they are at the top of the world. You can't tell them anything. They are the smartest one in the room. The rest of us are dumb, and we can just go to the back and listen to them. Unfortunately, it's one of the pitfalls of this archetype, and it is actually a pitfall that is celebrated, believe it or not. There are a lot of people who feel like they should not be sharing certain information with the masses or with the world because people are dumb. Which, to a degree, yes, people are dumb. There are some people who are dumb. I'm not going to take that away, all right? There are some people you have heard on YouTube or in real life who just say the darnest things. However, if you keep gatekeeping information, our society in turn will be stifled. There's not that collaborative aspect of the sage that does help them grow into an even more mature and an even better sage. This is why I think the truth of this archetype is actually to find the truth. However, you cannot find the truth, the actual truth, the real truth, if you're going to keep all the information to yourself. I've never seen that work, but you're the smart one. All right, so thank you so much for spending your day with me. Please let me know what you thought of this video. Please let me know if you identify with this archetype. I hope I didn't put too much damper on this video, but sage's knowledge and information gathering and truth, and I felt like it was appropriate for this particular archetype to tell you the truth. Like I said, you cannot evolve and you cannot find the truth if you are willing to gatekeep all the information you have. And I hope I did this archetype justice. I hope you don't feel too offended, okay? If you do, I'm definitely going to hear in the comment section, because people who embody the sage archetype, they do love to communicate, okay? There's a certain aspect of this archetype that has to be right. So I'm definitely going to hear in the comments, but, feel free to write out what you thought. Feel free to let me know if you were able to learn something new today. And feel free to let me know if this is an archetype active in you. Like I said, it's a fabulous archetype to have. It's not a bad thing. Knowledge is power. However, just don't keep all the knowledge to yourself. you're not helping anyone else, and you're definitely not helping yourself. You think you're helping yourself, but you're not. All right. Thank you so much for watching and listening to this, and I see you next week. Bye.